There exists a particular type of suffering that millions carry in silence, a weight so familiar that we mistake it for normal. It is the crushing feeling that washes over you the moment you dare to speak a simple word. No, I can't. I'm not available. I don't want to. The words leave your mouth, and immediately, you feel as though you have committed a moral crime, as if you have betrayed some invisible contract that dictates your worth is measured by your availability to others. This video is for those who know this feeling intimately, for those who have found themselves spiraling into guilt after the simple act of self-preservation, for those who struggle to set boundaries without feeling like they are disappointing everyone around them, for those who say yes when every fiber of their being screams no, and then wonder why they feel so empty, so resentful, so lost. The guilt you feel when saying no is not natural. It is learned. It is the result of years, sometimes decades, of emotional conditioning that teaches you that your value as a human being is directly tied to how much you can sacrifice for others. This conditioning runs so deep that most people never question it. They accept the guilt as proof of their goodness, their empathy, their love. But what if I told you that this guilt is not a sign of virtue? What if it is actually a sign of something far more troubling? What if the guilt you feel is not your moral compass speaking, but rather the voice of a system designed to keep you compliant, available, and ultimately controllable? In the next hour, we will tear apart this system piece by piece. We will explore the psychological mechanisms that make saying no feel like an act of betrayal. We will examine how childhood experiences shape adults who cannot preserve themselves without punishing themselves for it. We will uncover why some people seem to thrive on your inability to refuse them, and how they use your guilt as a tool of manipulation. Most importantly, we will show you how to break free from this emotional prison without losing your compassion, your sensitivity, or your capacity for love. Because saying no is not about becoming cold or selfish. It is about becoming free. The story begins in childhood, as most psychological patterns do. Picture a young child, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, who expresses a preference, sets a boundary, or simply says no to something an adult wants them to do. In a healthy environment, this child's autonomy would be respected within reasonable limits. They would learn that their feelings matter, that their voice has value, and that love does not require the complete erasure of self. But this is not what happens for many children. Instead, they learn that love comes with conditions. They discover that affection, attention, and approval are rewards granted only when they comply, when they please, when they say yes to what others want from them. The child who refuses to hug a relative is scolded for being rude. The child who doesn't want to share their toy is labeled selfish. The child who expresses frustration is told they are being difficult. These experiences might seem minor, even necessary for teaching children social skills. But what they actually teach is something far more damaging. They teach that authenticity is dangerous. They teach that personal boundaries are selfish. They teach that love is conditional on performance, compliance, and self-denial. This is not conscious malice on the part of most parents or caregivers. They are often repeating patterns they learned in their own childhoods, patterns that stretch back generations. They believe they are teaching their children to be good, kind, considerate people. But what they are actually creating are adults who do not know how to honor their own needs without feeling guilty about it. The child internalizes these lessons deeply. They learn that saying no means risking rejection, disapproval, or the withdrawal of love. They adapt by becoming whatever others need them to be. They smile when they want to cry. They agree when they want to refuse. They give when they have nothing left to offer. And gradually, they lose touch with their own authentic desires, needs, and boundaries. As these children grow into adults, they carry this programming with them like invisible chains. They become people pleasers, chronic overgivers, individuals who would rather suffer in silence than risk disappointing someone else. They develop what researchers call toxic shame, a deep-seated belief that they are only worthy of love when they are useful to others. Brené Brown, one of the world's leading researchers on shame and vulnerability, describes toxic shame as different from healthy guilt. Healthy guilt says, "I did something wrong." Toxic shame says, "I am wrong for wanting this, for needing this, for being this way." It is this toxic shame that makes setting boundaries feel like a moral failure. Consider the adult who cannot say no to extra work assignments, even when they are already overwhelmed. On the surface, this might look like dedication or work ethic, but underneath, there is often a terrified child who learned that their value depends on being indispensable. That saying no might mean being cast aside, forgotten, or replaced. Or think about the person who cannot refuse social invitations, even when they desperately need alone time to recharge. They show up to every gathering, every party, every obligation with a smile on their face and exhaustion in their bones. They tell themselves they are being a good friend, a loyal family member, a social person. But the truth is often that they are operating from a place of fear, the fear that saying no will reveal them to be the selfish, uncaring person they have been conditioned to believe they are. This conditioning creates what psychologists call learned helplessness in the realm of personal autonomy. People become so accustomed to ignoring their own needs that they eventually lose the ability to recognize them. They know they feel tired, stressed, resentful, or empty, but they cannot connect these feelings to their inability to set boundaries. Instead, they blame themselves for not being strong enough, patient enough, or generous enough. The tragic irony is that this pattern often attracts exactly the wrong kind of people into their lives. Those who truly respect and care for others naturally appreciate healthy boundaries. They want their friends, family members, and colleagues to be honest about their limits because they understand that authentic relationships require authentic communication. But those who benefit from someone else's inability to say no, those who exploit chronic people pleasers, they are drawn to this dynamic like moths to flame. They can sense, often unconsciously, when someone will not or cannot refuse them, and they take advantage of this, sometimes subtly, sometimes blatantly. These are the people who react with anger, guilt-tripping, or emotional manipulation when someone finally tries to set a boundary. They are the ones who say things like, "But I thought you cared about me," or "You're being so selfish," or "This isn't like you." They use the people pleaser's own conditioning against them, weaponizing their guilt to maintain the status quo. This creates a vicious cycle. The people pleaser experiences their boundary setting as evidence of their moral failure, which reinforces their toxic shame which makes them even less likely to set boundaries in the future. Meanwhile, the manipulator learns that guilt-tripping works, that applying emotional pressure will restore their access to the other person's time, energy, and resources. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that the guilt you feel when saying no is not a reliable moral indicator. It is a conditioned response, as automatic and unconscious as pulling your hand away from a hot stove. The difference is that this response is not protecting you from real danger. It is protecting you from imaginary threats based on childhood fears that are no longer relevant to your adult life. The fear of abandonment that drives people-pleasing made sense when you were a child, completely dependent on adults for survival. If saying no truly meant losing their love and care, then compliance was indeed a survival strategy. But as an adult, you have other options. You have other relationships. You have your own resources. You have the ability to create a life that honors both your need for connection and your need for autonomy. Yet the child's programming persists, creating adults who live as if they are still completely dependent on others for their emotional and physical survival. They operate from a scarcity mindset, believing that love is finite, that they must earn every scrap of affection, that any display of self-care will result in abandonment. This programming is so pervasive in our culture that we rarely question it. We praise self-sacrifice and view it as a virtue. We celebrate those who give until it hurts, who put everyone else first, who never ask for anything in return. We create narratives around martyrdom that make suffering seem noble and self-care seem selfish. But what if we have it backwards? What if the ability to say no, to set boundaries, to honor your own needs is actually a sign of emotional maturity rather than selfishness? What if people who cannot say no are not more virtuous, but simply more controlled by unconscious fears? Research in psychology supports this perspective. Studies show that people with healthy boundaries are actually more capable of genuine intimacy, more reliable in their commitments, and more present in their relationships. When someone says yes because they choose to, rather than because they feel obligated to, their yes has more meaning, more authenticity, more power. Conversely, people who cannot say no often become resentful, exhausted, and emotionally unavailable, even when they are physically present. They give from a place of depletion rather than abundance, which ultimately serves no one well. Their relationships become transactional rather than relational, based on obligation rather than genuine care. The workplace provides countless examples of this dynamic. Consider the employee who takes on every additional project, stays late every night, and never uses their vacation time. They tell themselves they are being dedicated, hardworking, and valuable. But often they are operating from fear, the fear that saying no will reveal them to be expendable. This employee might receive praise for their availability, but they also become the dumping ground for every unwanted task. Colleagues learn that they can pass their work to this person without resistance. Managers learn that they can make unreasonable demands without pushback. The employee becomes trapped in a cycle of increasing responsibility without corresponding recognition or compensation. Meanwhile, colleagues who set clear boundaries about their availability and workload are often more respected, more fairly compensated, and more likely to advance in their careers. They are seen as professionals who value their own time and expertise, which makes others value it as well. The same dynamic plays out in romantic relationships. The partner who cannot say no often finds themselves in relationships with people who take advantage of their accommodating nature. They might attract partners who are selfish, demanding, or emotionally immature because these partners instinctively seek out people who will not challenge their behavior. The people pleaser tells themselves they are being loving, supportive, and understanding. But what they are actually doing is enabling dysfunction and teaching their partner that their needs do not matter. They create relationships based on inequality rather than mutual respect. In contrast, people who can set healthy boundaries tend to attract partners who are also emotionally mature. They create relationships based on mutual care, where both partners' needs are considered and respected. These relationships are more satisfying, more stable, and more growth-oriented for both people involved. Family relationships often present the most challenging arena for boundary setting because these are the relationships where the original conditioning took place. The adult who learned as a child that love requires complete availability may find it especially difficult to set limits with family members. They might be the one who always hosts holidays, always provides emotional support, always says yes to requests for money, time, or assistance. They tell themselves this is what family does for each other. But if the dynamic is one-sided, if they are always giving and others are always taking, then it is not really about family love. It is about the continuation of childhood patterns where their worth was contingent on their usefulness. Breaking these patterns often requires grieving the loss of the fantasy that if you just give enough, sacrifice enough, accommodate enough, you will finally receive the unconditional love you have always craved. The painful truth is that love that requires you to erase yourself is not love. It is something else entirely, something that serves the other person's needs while neglecting your own. True love, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, includes respect for your autonomy, your boundaries, your separate selfhood. It does not require you to be endlessly available, endlessly accommodating, endlessly self-sacrificing. In fact, true love is enhanced by healthy boundaries because boundaries create the space for authentic choice. When someone chooses to spend time with you, support you, or care for you from a place of genuine desire rather than obligation, their gift has more meaning. When someone says yes because they want to rather than because they feel they have to, their yes is more valuable. When someone loves you for who you are rather than for what you do for them, that love is more real, more sustaining, more nourishing. Learning to say no is therefore not about becoming selfish or uncaring. It is about becoming authentic. It is about creating space for genuine choice in your relationships. It is about teaching others how to treat you by demonstrating how you treat yourself. This process begins with recognizing the voice of toxic shame when it arises. The next time you feel guilty for setting a boundary, pause and ask yourself where this guilt is coming from. Is it based on realistic consequences in your current adult life? Or is it based on childhood fears that are no longer relevant? Often, the guilt is disproportionate to the actual situation. You might feel terrible about declining a social invitation, as if you have committed a grave offense, when in reality, you are simply choosing to spend your free time differently. You might feel awful about saying no to an extra work project, as if you are betraying your company, when in reality, you are protecting your existing commitments and your personal well-being. The guilt often includes catastrophic thinking, imagining that this one instance of boundary setting will result in rejection, abandonment, or retaliation. But when you examine these fears rationally, they are rarely based in reality. Most emotionally healthy people understand and respect boundaries. They might be disappointed if you cannot accommodate their request, but they do not punish you for having limits. If someone does punish you for setting a boundary, that tells you something important about their character and their intentions. People who truly care about your well-being want you to take care of yourself. They want you to be honest about your limits. They want your relationship to be based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. Those who react with anger, guilt-tripping, or manipulation when you set a boundary are revealing that they do not actually respect you as a separate person with your own needs and rights. They are showing you that they view you as a resource to be consumed rather than a person to be cherished. This distinction is crucial for building healthy relationships. Pay attention to how people respond when you say no. Do they accept your decision gracefully, even if they are disappointed? Do they respect your right to make choices about your own time and energy? Do they continue to treat you with warmth and respect? Or do they become cold, critical, or punishing? Their response tells you whether they see you as an autonomous individual deserving of respect, or as someone whose primary purpose is to serve their needs. It tells you whether the relationship is based on genuine care or on conditional acceptance that depends on your compliance. Learning to trust these observations can be challenging for people who have been conditioned to doubt their own perceptions. Chronic people pleasers often gaslight themselves, convincing themselves that others' unreasonable reactions are somehow their fault. They blame themselves for being too sensitive, too demanding, too selfish when they attempt to set boundaries. But your perceptions are valid. If someone's response to your boundary feels manipulative, punitive, or disrespectful, trust that instinct. Your nervous system is giving you important information about the safety and health of the relationship. Learning to honor this internal guidance is part of developing healthy boundaries. Another crucial aspect of boundary setting is learning to say no without extensive justification. People pleasers often feel compelled to provide detailed explanations for their boundaries, as if they need to prove that their reasons are good enough to justify disappointing someone. But no is a complete sentence. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your choices about how to spend your time, energy, or resources. When you over-explain, you inadvertently communicate that your boundary is up for negotiation, that if your reasons are not deemed sufficient, you might be willing to change your mind. This creates an opening for manipulation. The other person might argue with your reasons, try to solve your stated problems, or convince you that their need is more important than whatever you have prioritized. They might make you feel guilty for your choices or suggest that you are being unreasonable. Instead, practice stating your boundary clearly and kindly, without extensive justification. I won't be able to help with that project. I'm not available that evening. That doesn't work for me. These statements are complete. They do not require detailed explanations or apologies. If the other person pushes for more information, you can simply repeat your boundary. As I mentioned, that doesn't work for me. If they continue to pressure you, their behavior is revealing something important about their respect for your autonomy. This approach may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are accustomed to justifying every decision. You might worry that you seem cold or uncaring, but remember that you are not responsible for managing other people's emotions about your boundaries. You are not required to make everyone happy with your choices. In fact, taking responsibility for others' emotional reactions to your boundaries is a form of emotional enmeshment that prevents both you and them from developing healthy autonomy. When you constantly cushion others from the natural disappointment that comes with not getting what they want, you rob them of opportunities to develop resilience and emotional regulation. Learning to tolerate others' disappointment without rushing to fix it is a crucial skill for maintaining boundaries. Disappointment is a normal part of life. People do not always get what they want when they want it. Learning to handle this reality gracefully is part of emotional maturity. When you constantly accommodate others to prevent their disappointment, you enable emotional immaturity. You teach them that their feelings are more important than your needs, that their comfort takes precedence over your well-being. This creates dependency rather than healthy interdependence. Healthy relationships involve a balance of giving and receiving, of accommodation and boundary setting. Sometimes you say yes to things you do not particularly want to do because you care about the other person and the relationship. Sometimes you say no because you need to honor your own limits and priorities. Both responses are valid and necessary for relational health. The key is that your yes and your no both come from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. When you say yes, it is because you have considered your options and decided that this particular accommodation aligns with your values and priorities. When you say no, it is because you have recognized that this request conflicts with your needs, boundaries, or commitments. This conscious choice-making requires developing a stronger relationship with yourself. You need to know what you value, what you need, what energizes you, and what depletes you. You need to understand your own rhythms, limits, and priorities. This self-knowledge forms the foundation for healthy boundary setting. Many people who struggle with boundaries have lost touch with their own internal guidance system. They are so accustomed to looking outside themselves for direction, approval, and validation that they have forgotten how to tune into their own needs and desires. They make decisions based on what others want from them, rather than what feels right for them. Reconnecting with your internal wisdom is a gradual process. It might begin with small experiments in honoring your preferences, choosing a restaurant you actually want to eat at rather than defaulting to what others prefer, wearing clothes that feel good to you rather than what you think others will approve of, taking a few minutes of solitude when you need it rather than forcing yourself to be social. These small acts of self-honoring create space for your authentic self to emerge. As you practice paying attention to your own needs and desires, you become more skilled at recognizing them. You develop confidence in your ability to make good decisions for yourself. This process often involves grieving the loss of your people-pleasing identity. If you have built your sense of self around being helpful, accommodating, and available, learning to set boundaries can feel like losing a fundamental part of who you are. You might worry that without your people-pleasing tendencies, you will be selfish, unlikable, or alone. But what you discover is the opposite. As you become more authentic, more boundaried, more selective about your commitments, you actually become more attractive to emotionally healthy people. You develop deeper, more meaningful relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than one-sided accommodation. You also discover that you have more energy, more enthusiasm, and more joy when you stop giving from a place of obligation and start giving from a place of choice. Your relationships become more balanced, more reciprocal, more satisfying for everyone involved. The journey toward healthy boundaries is not always smooth. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when the old guilt rises up and tries to convince you that you are being selfish or unreasonable. There will be people in your life who resist your new boundaries, who try to guilt you back into your old patterns. These challenges are normal and expected. Change is difficult, especially when it involves altering dynamics that have been in place for years or decades. Be patient with yourself as you learn new ways of being in relationship. Be prepared for some pushback from those who benefited from your old patterns. Remember that their resistance is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are doing something different, something that serves your well-being rather than their convenience. Their discomfort with your boundaries is not your responsibility to fix. Instead, view these challenges as opportunities to strengthen your commitment to yourself. Each time you maintain a boundary in the face of pressure, you build confidence in your ability to honor your own needs. Each time you resist the urge to over-explain or apologize for your limits, you reinforce your right to make autonomous decisions. Over time, these new patterns become more natural. The guilt associated with boundary setting diminishes. Your relationships reorganize around healthier dynamics. You discover that you can be both kind and boundaried, both loving and self-respecting, both connected and autonomous. The people who truly belong in your life will adjust to your new way of being. They will appreciate your honesty, respect your limits, and value the authenticity you bring to the relationship. Those who cannot accept your boundaries will often remove themselves from your life, creating space for healthier connections. This natural selection process, while sometimes painful, ultimately serves your highest good. You end up surrounded by people who see you as a whole person, deserving of respect rather than a resource to be consumed. Your relationships become more nourishing, more balanced, more supportive of your growth and well-being. Learning to say no is ultimately an act of self-love. It is a declaration that you matter, that your needs are valid, that your well-being is important. It is a commitment to honoring the person you are, rather than performing the person others want you to be. This is not selfish. This is necessary. You cannot give from an empty cup. You cannot love others authentically if you do not first love yourself enough to protect your own well-being. You cannot create healthy relationships if you do not model what healthy boundaries look like. The world needs people who know how to say no just as much as it needs people who know how to say yes. We need individuals who can make conscious choices about their commitments rather than defaulting to automatic compliance. We need people who can maintain their integrity and authenticity in the face of pressure to conform. When you learn to set healthy boundaries, you become a gift to the world. You model emotional maturity for others. You create space for authentic relationships. You contribute from a place of strength rather than depletion. You show others that it is possible to be both caring and self-respecting, both generous and boundaried. The journey begins with a single number, a single moment of choosing yourself over the fear of disappointing others, a single act of honoring your own needs rather than automatically accommodating everyone else's. That first boundary might feel terrifying, but it is also liberating. It is the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, one based on respect rather than exploitation. It is the start of healthier relationships with others, ones based on choice rather than obligation. It is the foundation for a life lived with integrity, authenticity, and joy. So the next time you feel the urge to say yes when everything inside you is screaming no, pause. Remember that your needs matter. Remember that boundaries are not selfish, but necessary. Remember that teaching others how to treat you begins with how you treat yourself. Say no. Say it without apology, without extensive justification, without guilt. Say it because you deserve to have choices about your own life. Say it because authentic relationships require authentic communication. Say it because you are worth protecting. Your no is not a rejection of others. It is an affirmation of yourself. It is a statement that you exist, not just to serve others' needs, but to live your own life with intention and integrity. It is a declaration of your inherent worth as a human being. The guilt you feel is not your moral compass. It is the echo of old programming that no longer serves you. Trust in your right to make autonomous decisions. Trust in your ability to discern what is truly good for you. Trust that those who love you will respect your boundaries, and those who do not respect your boundaries do not truly love you. This is the psychology of saying no. It is complex, it is challenging, and it is absolutely essential for psychological health and relational well-being. It is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, and ultimately, one of the greatest gifts you can give to those who truly care about you. When you have spent years automatically saying yes to everything, your brain creates habits around people pleasing. It is like wearing a path through a field by walking the same route every day. Your mind follows the familiar route of compliance because it feels safer, even when it makes you miserable. But here is what most people do not realize. You can create new paths by practicing saying no, even in small ways. Let me share a story that illustrates how deeply these patterns can run. Sarah was a successful marketing executive who prided herself on being the person everyone could count on. She worked weekends, took on extra projects, and never said no to social commitments. She told herself this made her valuable, indispensable, loved. But Sarah was exhausted. She had not taken a real vacation in 3 years. She had not been on a date in months because she was too tired to invest in her personal life. She felt resentful toward her colleagues, who seemed to have better work-life balance. Yet she could not understand how they managed to say no to the constant demands that she felt compelled to accept. The turning point came when Sarah's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly, Sarah realized she wanted to spend more time with her family, but she had created a professional reputation based on being endlessly available. The thought of setting boundaries at work felt impossible. How could she tell her boss she needed to leave early for medical appointments? How could she refuse weekend assignments when her mother was fighting for her life? Sarah's story reveals a crucial truth about people pleasing. It does not actually make you more valuable or more loved. it makes you more vulnerable. When life presents real priorities, real emergencies, real needs for flexibility, the people pleaser finds themselves trapped by the very reputation they worked so hard to build. Sarah had to learn that setting boundaries was not just about her comfort. It was about her ability to show up for what truly mattered. She had to recognize that by saying yes to everything, she was actually saying no to the things that mattered most: her health, her family, her own well-being, her authentic relationships. This realization is often what motivates people to finally start setting boundaries. They recognize that their people-pleasing is not actually serving anyone well. They see that their resentment is poisoning their relationships. They understand that their exhaustion is preventing them from being fully present for the people they love. The process of change often begins with what feels like a crisis. A relationship ends because the people pleaser finally snaps and expresses years of suppressed resentment. A health issue forces them to slow down and examine their patterns. A work situation becomes so unbearable that they have no choice but to set limits. These crisis moments, while painful, can be gifts. They force you to confront the unsustainability of your patterns. They create motivation for change that might not exist otherwise. They strip away the illusions that keep you trapped in dysfunctional dynamics. For Sarah, her mother's illness became the catalyst for a complete restructuring of her relationship with boundaries. She realized that if she could not say no to unimportant things, she would not be able to say yes to the most important thing: being present for her mother during her treatment. Sarah started small. She began saying no to optional meetings that were not directly related to her core responsibilities. She stopped volunteering for every committee and project. She started leaving work at a reasonable hour most days. Initially, she felt terrible guilt and anxiety. She worried that her colleagues would think less of her, that her boss would question her commitment. But something surprising happened. Her work actually improved. When she focused her energy on fewer projects, she did them better. When she was not constantly exhausted, she was more creative, more strategic, more effective. Her boss did not question her commitment. Instead, he started relying on her for the most important work because he knew she would give it her full attention. Sarah's personal life also improved dramatically. She had energy for dating again. She developed deeper friendships because she was no longer resentful about her social commitments. She was able to be truly present for her mother because she was not constantly distracted by work stress. Most importantly, Sarah discovered that people respected her more when she had boundaries, not less. Her colleagues started coming to her for advice because they saw her as someone who had figured out how to have both a successful career and a fulfilling personal life. Her friends appreciated that when she said yes to spending time with them, they knew she genuinely wanted to be there. This transformation did not happen overnight. Sarah had to practice saying no thousands of times in small and large ways. She had to learn to tolerate the discomfort of disappointing people. She had to develop faith that the right opportunities and relationships would respect her boundaries. There were setbacks along the way. Old patterns would emerge during stressful periods. She would find herself slipping back into people pleasing when she felt insecure, or when she encountered particularly manipulative people. But each time, she was able to recognize what was happening more quickly and course correct. Sarah's story illustrates several key principles about boundary setting. First, it often takes a crisis or significant life event to create enough motivation to change deeply ingrained patterns. Second, the fear of setting boundaries is usually much worse than the actual consequences. Third, boundaries actually improve both your effectiveness and your relationships when implemented thoughtfully. The workplace presents unique challenges for boundary setting because financial security is involved. Many people feel they cannot afford to set limits with employers or colleagues because they fear job loss or career damage. This fear is often exaggerated, but it is not entirely unrealistic in some environments. If you work in a toxic environment where boundaries are genuinely punished, you may need to develop an exit strategy before you can set healthy limits. This might involve building your skills, saving money, networking for other opportunities, or developing alternative income sources. Sometimes the most important boundary you can set is leaving a situation that requires you to sacrifice your well-being for financial survival. However, many people overestimate the risks of boundary setting at work. They assume that saying no to any request will damage their reputation or job security, when in reality, most employers respect professionals who manage their workload thoughtfully and communicate their limits clearly. The key is learning to set boundaries professionally and strategically. Instead of saying, "I cannot do that because I am too busy," you might say, "I want to make sure I can give this the attention it deserves. Given my current commitments, I could start this project next month, or if it is urgent, I could reassign some of my other work. What would work best?" This approach demonstrates that you are thinking strategically about priorities rather than simply refusing to help. It gives your supervisor options and shows that you understand the business needs even as you communicate your limits. Another effective workplace strategy is to batch your boundary setting. Instead of saying no to individual requests as they arise, you might have a conversation with your supervisor about your overall workload and priorities. You might say, "I want to make sure I am focusing my energy on the most important projects. Can we review my current commitments and identify what should take priority?" This proactive approach positions you as someone who is thoughtful about resource allocation, rather than someone who is simply trying to avoid work. It also gives you more leverage, because you are discussing the big picture rather than defending individual decisions. Family relationships often present the most emotionally charged boundary-setting challenges. These are the relationships where the original conditioning occurred, where the deepest emotional triggers live, where the expectations are most entrenched. Consider Maria, who was the oldest of 4 children and learned early that her role in the family was to be the helper, the responsible one, the one everyone could count on. As an adult, she found herself constantly managing family crises, loaning money she could not afford, hosting holidays she was too stressed to enjoy, and mediating conflicts between family members. Maria loved her family, but she was exhausted by the constant demands. She felt guilty when she thought about setting boundaries because she knew her siblings relied on her. She worried that if she stopped being the family caretaker, the family would fall apart. She believed that her worth in the family was tied to her usefulness. The pattern escalated when Maria's youngest brother developed a gambling addiction. Suddenly, the family crisis centered around his debts, his lies, his manipulation. Maria found herself lending him money repeatedly, covering for him with other family members, and taking responsibility for cleaning up his messes. Maria's enabling behavior was not helping her brother. In fact, it was making his addiction worse by removing the natural consequences of his choices. But Maria could not see this because she was operating from childhood programming that told her she was responsible for everyone else's well-being. It took a therapist to help Maria understand that her people-pleasing was not actually loving behavior. It was controlling behavior disguised as love. By constantly rescuing family members from the consequences of their choices, she was preventing them from developing their own problem-solving skills and emotional resilience. Maria had to learn to distinguish between supporting and enabling. Supporting means offering encouragement, emotional presence, and appropriate help. Enabling means removing consequences, solving problems for others that they should solve themselves, and taking responsibility for other people's emotions and choices. Learning this distinction was revolutionary for Maria. She began to see that her constant availability was not helping her family members grow and mature. Instead, it was keeping them dependent and immature. Her brother's gambling addiction was the most extreme example, but she could see similar patterns throughout the family system. Maria started setting boundaries gradually. She told her brother she would no longer lend him money, but she would be available to support him emotionally if he chose to get treatment for his addiction. She stopped mediating conflicts between other family members and instead encouraged them to work things out directly. She started hosting smaller, simpler holiday gatherings that she could actually enjoy. The family's reaction was intense. They accused her of being selfish, uncaring, and abandoning them when they needed her most. Her brother's gambling addiction got worse before it got better because he could no longer rely on Maria to bail him out. Other family members had to step up and deal with problems they had previously passed to Maria. This period was extremely difficult for Maria. She had to tolerate enormous guilt and pressure while maintaining her boundaries. She had to resist the urge to rescue family members when they struggled with problems she used to solve for them. She had to learn to trust that they were capable of figuring things out for themselves. Gradually, the family system adjusted to the new dynamics. Her brother eventually sought treatment for his gambling addiction when he could no longer avoid the consequences of his behavior. Other family members developed better communication skills. When they could no longer rely on Maria to mediate their conflicts, the family gatherings became more genuinely enjoyable because Maria was no longer resentful about shouldering all the responsibility. Most importantly, Maria's relationships with her family members became more authentic. Instead of being valued primarily for what she could do for them, she began to be appreciated for who she was. Her family members started asking about her life, her feelings, her experiences, instead of just turning to her when they needed something. This transformation took several years and involved many difficult conversations and uncomfortable situations. But Maria emerged with a healthier sense of self and more balanced relationships. She learned that loving someone sometimes means allowing them to struggle with their own problems instead of rushing to fix everything for them. The dating world presents its own unique boundary challenges. People pleasers often attract partners who are looking for someone to take care of them, rather than someone to build a mutual partnership with. They might find themselves repeatedly dating people who are emotionally unavailable, irresponsible, or manipulative. Consider David, who had a pattern of dating women who needed fixing. He would meet someone who was going through a difficult divorce, struggling with addiction, having financial problems, or dealing with mental health issues. David would feel drawn to these women because he could be helpful, needed, valuable. David told himself he was being compassionate and supportive. He believed he was showing love by being endlessly patient with partners who were not fully available for a relationship. He ignored red flags and made excuses for behavior that his friends found concerning. But David's relationships followed a predictable pattern. He would give more and more while receiving less and less. He would solve his partner's problems while his own needs went unmet. He would become resentful but unable to express it directly. Eventually, the relationship would end when his partner either moved on to someone else or David finally reached his breaking point. David had to learn that his helpfulness was actually a form of control. By positioning himself as the rescuer, he was trying to make himself indispensable. He was trying to earn love through service, rather than building relationships based on mutual attraction and compatibility. This pattern was rooted in David's childhood experience with an alcoholic father. David had learned that love meant taking care of someone who could not take care of themselves. He had internalized the belief that his value came from his ability to handle other people's problems. Learning to date differently required David to completely reshape his understanding of love and relationships. He had to learn that healthy relationships involve two people who are both capable of taking care of themselves, choosing to share their lives together. He had to recognize that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. David started setting boundaries early in dating relationships. If someone was not emotionally available due to recent trauma or ongoing issues, he would express compassion but not try to fix their problems. If someone expected him to solve their financial difficulties or provide excessive emotional support, he would step back rather than rushing to help. This approach felt uncomfortable at first because David was accustomed to feeling valued for his helpfulness. When he stopped being the rescuer, he worried that he had nothing else to offer. He had to develop confidence in his other qualities, his humor, his intelligence, his interests, his values. But as David learned to set healthier boundaries, he began attracting healthier partners. Women who were looking for a mutual partnership rather than a caretaker were drawn to his emotional stability and clear sense of self. His relationships became more balanced, more fulfilling, and more sustainable. The process of learning to say no often involves grieving the loss of your people-pleasing identity. If you have built your sense of self around being helpful, accommodating, and available, setting boundaries can feel like losing a fundamental part of who you are. This grief is real and valid. You are indeed losing something, the false sense of control that comes from believing you can earn love through perfect behavior. You are releasing the fantasy that if you just give enough, sacrifice enough, accommodate enough, everyone will love and appreciate you, but what you gain is so much more valuable than what you lose. You gain authenticity, the ability to show up as your real self, rather than performing a version of yourself designed to please others. You gain energy because you are no longer depleting yourself, trying to meet everyone else's needs. You gain respect, both from others and from yourself. You also gain the possibility of real intimacy. When someone loves the authentic you, complete with boundaries and limitations, that love is more meaningful than affection based on your compliance. When someone chooses to spend time with you because they enjoy your company, rather than because you always say yes, that choice has more value. The journey toward healthy boundaries is not linear. There will be setbacks, moments when old patterns re-emerge, situations where you doubt yourself. This is normal and expected. Change is difficult, especially when it involves altering dynamics that have been in place for years or decades. Be patient with yourself as you learn new ways of being in relationship. Celebrate small victories. Notice improvements in your energy, your relationships, your sense of self. Trust that each boundary you set, each no you speak, each moment you choose yourself over the fear of disappointing others is contributing to your growth and freedom. Remember that you deserve relationships that honor your full humanity, including your need for autonomy, rest, and self-care. You deserve people in your life who respect your boundaries rather than punishing you for having them. You deserve to make choices about your time and energy based on your own values and priorities rather than others' expectations. The power is in your hands. The choice is yours. And you are worthy of making choices that honor both your need for connection and your need for autonomy. You are worthy of relationships that celebrate who you are, rather than demanding that you erase yourself. You are worthy of a life lived with integrity, authenticity, and joy. Start today. Start now. Your authentic, boundaried, empowered life is waiting for you to claim it.